Let me ask you this. We're there and seeing this. And you've been there every step of the way for, every OTA, minicamp, so on and so forth. Is there a young player that you think has bust out potential this summer who, because of their ability, could kind of change the outlook of this season? I've got, 8 or 9 names here of guys that I think could be candidates. Jordan Mason, Trey Lance, Danny Gray, Kalia Davis, Drake Jackson, Samuel Womack, Marcelino McCrary Ball, and I even kind of like Spencer Wagee from North Dakota State as a player that I think he could maybe make an impact this year. Did you see any young player that you felt, watch this guy, he may bust out, and if he does, he could kind of change the way this team looks a little bit this year?
Well, the guy out of the guys that you listed, the guy that's at the most potentially impactful hinge point is Drake Jackson. Because you look at the way this defense is constructed, they were the number one defense in football last year. And I think on paper, along the front line, they've only gotten stronger because they added Javon Hargrave, who was one of the most impactful defenders in the entire NFL. Took him away from Philadelphia as an added bonus. So this 49ers defense is locked, loaded, and ready to go at every single position except for the edge rusher spot opposite Nick Bosa, where coincidentally they lost Charles Omenihu, they lost Sansom Ebukam, and they lost Jordan Willis to free agency. So this goes back to one of my first points. At some point, while you're paying a bunch of guys, and this offseason they paid Javon Hargrave so that the really rich collection of stars got even bigger. At some point when you're doing that, your draftees and your developmental guys have to fill in the rest of the gaps. And the one gap that I'm seeing that needs to be filled in by a draftee / developmental guy is edge rusher opposite Nick Bosa. And that's Drake Jackson. So out of all those players, he's the guy in a position of leverage right here. He's in a position where he can make a big difference for the 49ers. We're talking really good defense versus potentially historical defense. If Drake Jackson shows up and can become an 8-sack guy for the 49ers, assuming that Bosa stays healthy, assuming that Hargrave stays healthy, you look at the linebacker core, that's the best in football. The secondary should be fine playing behind that kind of front seven. All of a sudden, you'll be talking, I think we'll be looking at some historical trends for this 49ers defense, just like we were in 2019 when that unit was firing at full cylinders and Dee Ford was still healthy. So that's a lot of pressure on Drake Jackson's shoulders. But to answer your question, I think that's the most accurate way I can do it because he is in that spot where he might be that determining figure. Have we seen potential? I think so. He's got tremendous bend. We already saw that last year, but he straight ran out of gas toward the end of the year. He had played 11 games in a season at most entering last year at USC. 49ers played 20. So you can see how he did run out of gas, how he did hit that rookie wall. He's about 12 to 15 pounds stronger now. I know you saw him out at OTAs. Physically looks different. But, you could do all the right stuff in the weight room. It is still a battle when you get out there on an NFL field week in, week out to be able to stand up against the run, not just in September, but also in December when it's cold out, when it hurts a little bit more to get physical. So, the test in front of Drake Jackson is a big one that's not going to be won or passed just by picking up 12 pounds of muscle in the offseason. He's going to go out there and prove it. But if he does, I think the ceiling for this 49ers defense can be somewhere really special.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy because he played really well. I thought he played really smart last year. Batted down a number of passes. If he couldn't get there, he would cross the quarterback's face and impact the play. Usually that's a veteran type move. So I thought he showed some advanced technique. But his body the difference in the upper body between, like, let's say Samson Ebukam and Drake Jackson last year was night and day. And now Drake looks bulkier, but he's not necessarily cut. He just looks bigger. And then the question is, can he retain that weight in season over the course of many, many weeks? And then I assume Bosa is going to get an extension. But let's just say Bosa had any kind of an injury and had to be, out for 3-4 weeks. Could Drake handle constant double teams if Kerry Hyder or, Austin Bryant were opposite him, or Cleveland Farrell. I don't know. And that kind of dovetail. By the way, on this question, I kind of think Jordan Mason might really establish himself this summer as a really strong player who can really impact things, and could push ahead of Elijah Mitchell and maybe Ty Davis Price and be a primary runner for the 49ers. He'd be the guy that I would probably say would be the young player that I think could bust out. But as far as the next question, do the Niners, in your mind, Dave, need to add a veteran free agent edge rusher? I mean, they brought in Hargrave, but they'd said goodbye to Willis and Ebukam and Amenahue, and they play their D line effectively in a rotation. Like the backup D linemen on this team play. The backup O linemen only play if there's an injury for the most part. But on the D line, everybody who's up plays in a rotation. How much are they going to miss those three guys? It's about 700 snaps. And do you look at their roster and say, you know what? After Drake and Bosa, there's a dramatic drop off to Cleveland Farrell and Austin Bryant, and the Niners absolutely need to add a free agent edge rusher? Or do you think they're a little bit more solid there than I'm giving them credit for?
Well, again, the answer is somewhere in the middle, and where the answer actually ends up landing is so dependent on Drake Jackson. That's why I mentioned him as this hinge point. If Drake Jackson takes the leap that the 49ers want him to take in year two, he solves a whole lot of problems. If he doesn't, yeah, you probably should be looking for somebody else. Now, the problem for the 49ers is they're trying to build as sustainable of a roster as possible. And they already have $271 million in liabilities on the 2024 books. That means they're going to have to slash millions upon millions. We don't even know what the cap is going to be yet, but it's not going to be $270 million in 2024. Cap space that you don't use this year carries over to next year. So they have $10.4 million right now. They can either decide to go for an edge rusher to, fortify the roster at the last minute during training camp, or they can keep that open either for in-season maneuverability, like last season's trade for Christian McCaffrey, or potentially even a carryover into 2024 so they can keep this roster as sustainable as possible. So nothing that the 49ers do from a signing perspective should be taken lightly, because there are potential ramifications to anything that they do downstream financially. And that's why I think they're going to sit back and they're going to collect as much information as they possibly can during training camp about Drake Jackson. They're going to look to see what Cleveland Farrell looks like in their system. Remember, it's totally possible that Farrell looks a whole lot better with Chris Kasarik and the 49ers than he did with the Raiders, because that's just the thing that happens when players play under Chris Kasarik. And the same thing with Austin Bryant. Don't forget about Robert Beal Jr. too. The rookie out of Georgia. He has all of the measurables that Chris Kasarik wants in his system. So I think, the luxury of having a great position coach like Kasarik and a good scouting department that has gone out and grabbed players that seem to fit what Kasarik wants to work with. He wants a certain type of clay to mold. Well, they've got 4 shots at this, right? Between Drake Jackson, Bryant, Cleveland Farrell, and Robert Beal Jr. You would think if you're the 49ers, you're going to believe that Kasarik can, develop at least 2 really competent edge rushers out of those 4 players. And that's the bet they're going to take. If during training camp, it seems it's not trending in that direction, I think that's when you make that signing. But I think that's more of a last resort thing, just because the bigger financial picture that the 49ers are facing right now, they are not in a position where they could just be whimsically spending $5 million here, $6 million there, $7 million there. They have to really protect the money that they have, because they've been spending so much over the recent years.
Did you notice Beal at all in any of the offseason stuff? Because I don't know if it's just the number that he got. I think they gave him 33. But I just never really noticed him. Now, I try to make sure I don't go out of my way to look for guys. I try to make, them kind of show themselves, naturally and organically. I try not to be like, okay, where's this guy? Where's that guy? He never stood out to me at any point. But what you referenced there, he's got sub 4.5 speed. He's got an incredible wingspan. He had a really nice sack against TCU in the national semi. Or was it the national championship?
Yeah.
He looked really, really explosive at Georgia in a small sample size. Did you ever catch him this summer and feel like you saw something that you liked?
No, and I'm going to be consistent with this. People always ask me about O&D linemen and OTAs, and I say I'm not trying to evaluate these guys during OTAs. I'm not a line expert. I'm sure Chris Kasarik has ways to see certain stuff. I'm sure Chris Furster has ways to see certain stuff of an OTAs. But for me, my eyes really move more toward the trenches once the pads come on at training camp. So, OTAs, I like the receiver presence from somebody like Ronnie Bell. I thought Danny Gray made some strides, even though he
Yeah.
dropped too many passes. That's what I kept my eye on, right? I wanted to see Trey Lance's mechanics. I wanted to see Jake Moody kick, and I got to see all those things. But until the pads come on, once they're out of the shorts, it's really tough to really evaluate the truly physical positions, right? And that's why running back evaluation is extra tricky, because even when pads come on, you're not tackling to the ground. So it's really hard to gauge, okay, who really has that dog in him at running back, especially in the way that the 49ers want it, because they love all this stuff after contact. That's where preseason is important. So anyway, as far as Robert Beal goes, I didn't notice him, but I wasn't expecting to notice him. And we'll see what happens in training camp.